Welcome to Simply Enough. This is Zachary and Elizabeth, and thanks for tuning in.
If you're liking our podcast, we'd love it if you'd share with your friends and family.
And then rate and review to raise our visibility and spread the message of enoughness.
We love you, and remember, you are simply enough.
Just as you are.
Period. You just brought tears to my eyes. Thank you so much for quelling the itty bitty shitty committee in my head.
For those of you who do know how to drive stick or don't, you know it can be a very awkward way to drive, particularly if as you're hitting the clutch, you don't time it right and it can get a little herky-jerky.
If you're not uncomfortable while you're doing it, you're probably not doing it right. So
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simply Enough. I'm Mr. Zachary Leonard.
And I'm Dr. Elizabeth Ignacio, and I'm back in Honolulu, just having come back from dropping off my daughter at college. And our last episode was about, the things that we learn from youth. And so it made me that much more kind of mindful and aware of where I am in my life right now and what I'm learning from my kids, right? And especially in dropping off my daughter. And it's her second year, her sophomore year at her college. And, Zachary, I was telling you how I've never felt more superfluous in my life in that, which is a bittersweet feeling in that, it was so special to have my daughter, here back at home in Honolulu for 3 months. And of course, I consider this home and I consider this home for her. Yet upon bringing her back to her college for her sophomore year, it did my mama heart good to see how happy and solid and grounded my daughter is at college, that it's like the world is her oyster and that college campus is hers. And I could see that as she's with her friends. I can see that as she's navigating, her course curriculum and her calendar and all this kind of stuff, that I'm like, wow, she's good. She's in a good place. She loves it. This is her home. And I'm not needed. I'm feeling really superfluous, which as a mom and honestly, as a physician, right? So I'm used to taking care of people. It's a really weird place to be in this season of my life in terms of kind of feeling superfluous. And so it's made me mindful and reflective of, okay, in this season of life, especially also my son who will be graduating from high school. This is his senior year. And so he's going to also be off to college. Not to say a midlife crisis per se, not at all, but just a midlife reflection of where does my life, and of course that includes my husband's, but where I feel like I'm in this place of transition in terms of what fills my life now in terms of, I've never been one to ever want just my career to define me. And that's still going to be a major part of my day and my life. And also transitioning into being able, I hope, to be a better, more present and mindful wife to my husband, because it's been so much about the kids. And so I just feel like I'm in this unsettling place. And I don't even want to say unsettling because that sounds negative. I feel no negativity about it whatsoever, but more kind of curiosity of how do I approach what feels to be a transition in my life, whereas prior to this point, my 52 years of life, everything seemed so very directed in terms of, go to school and then go to college, then go to med school, then go to residency, then fellowship, then practice. And now I'm a mother. And now I'm going to, navigate these 18 years of being a mother. And I will always be a mother. And I hope that I can, God willing, continue, to be a productive and successful physician, and hope that I'm an even better wife and better daughter and better friend to my friends and make new friends. But where am I in this kind of feeling of a transition in life. So that's where I am. And I know you, Zachary, have recently gone through that over these past few years, having upped and moved with your husband from Hawaii, having a great, fantastic, solid career, making an impact here in Honolulu, and whoop, all of a sudden you due to family reasons, up and move, to the continent, to Chicago. You navigated what I am feeling uncomfortable with a little bit right now, which is transitions in life.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I, first of all, just want to say, to give you a little bit of acknowledgement, you've gone through these transitions as a mom, as a wife, like throughout your life. And I feel like many of us have similarly relatable moments, particularly for the parents involved, like that first day of kindergarten as a kindergarten teacher, when parents would drop their kids off, were literally in their eyes. You could see some of what you're talking about, that word of superfluous that you kept saying, like some of the kids that would just walk right into the classroom. There was such a sadness. Those parents wanted their child to turn around and hug them. And like, they wanted to cry a little bit, like,
yes.
Wait a minute, still need me. And here this child comes in, looking confident, like they go right into the classroom. And there is that spot for that parent to just say, wait a minute, what does my role look like now? And what does that mean for me? And it becomes a very introspective place. And I want to kick us off a little bit with somewhat of a silly story to connect with what you were saying, because of what I immediately thought of, but I think it actually will transition us into what you were talking about, which is the where I've been and my thinking in the last 2 years of this move to Chicago, to just share some things that have helped me, and then I think it'll resonate with you and our listeners, and then Elizabeth, perhaps you'll have, as you always do, some tremendous insights for us. So the first thing that I'll say is, when I was learning to drive, I was actually, my job during the summer was, I was a water delivery boy. I worked with another guy. We had the big truck with the 5-gallon bottles, and we would go and we would deliver these, these big water bottles to companies or homes or whatnot. And this wonderful, just kind, gentle man, he had, his own personal car was a stick shift. And as I was turning 16 and preparing to learn to drive, he felt strongly that I should learn how to drive a stick shift. Okay. Now, I don't know if some of our younger listeners even know what a stick shift is like, because maybe most cars are automatic at this point, but it is a transmission that requires a manual shift. It has a gear shift that allows you to go from first gear to second gear and accelerate as you drive. For those of you who do know how to drive stick or don't, it can be a very awkward way to drive, particularly if, as you're hitting the clutch, you don't time it right, and it can get a little herky-jerky. What was fascinating to me, and I'm not going to share with you all the details of how bad I was at driving a stick shift. The guy that I was working with, his name is Don. Don was actually quite forthcoming about, he's driven stick most of his life. And yet, even in driving stick, the transition from first gear to second gear, or second gear to third gear, was not always quote unquote smooth. That he was either going uphill or downhill, or there was somebody close to him or behind him, or he was maybe approaching a yellow light or something like that. That he always would think that the transition was its own transition. And so, like, if it was a little herky-jerky, okay, that's what happened. And I never really thought about how that actually was a good metaphor for life, and that sometimes transitions can be smooth, but sometimes they can be herky-jerky. And it doesn't matter if you've been driving or living for 52 years, that you may still hit a situation where it just calls upon all of your reserves and support networks, because it is a different kind of transition. Hard, easy, it doesn't really matter, whatever word you want to put in there. So I thought initially of Don and learning how to drive a stick, because even after however many years of him driving stick, there were times when, as he would shift into downshift, upshift, whatever, it was still like a back and forth, and we'd be sitting in his truck. And new beginner, obviously I wasn't very good at it, but he also gave the space to say, that's part of life. That's what's supposed to happen. So I share that with you right off the bat.
I love that. If I can just say, yeah. I just thank you for that allowance of space and grace, of recognizing that Yeah, it's not comfortable. And of course, it therefore makes me think of everybody drinking game, drink, because I'm going to bring him up, Ted Lasso. In the very first episode of season 1, so the pilot episode, as Ted Lasso and Coach Beard are making the transition of going from America to the UK, and Ted Lasso asks Coach Beard, his bestie, is this crazy what we're doing? You know, this I don't know if this doesn't feel easy. And I think it was Coach Beard, although this sounds like a Ted Lasso comment, but I think it was Coach Beard who actually said, it's kind of like, it's kind of like riding a horse. If you're not uncomfortable while you're doing it, you're probably not doing it right. So if you allow yourself just the acceptance of, well, it's a transition, it's not going to be comfortable, or it's not going to be easy going from first gear to second gear, then it might not really be a impactful transition. So it's okay, to your point, that herky-jerkiness sometimes, that discomfort. Another thing that I'm just going to say, I do say this to my coaching clients, and I just love that you brought up, you know, and I unforeseen, I did not know you're going to bring it up, but I love your using the metaphor of changing or switching gears, because what I like to tell my coaching clients often is when they feel kind of overwhelmed by, well, I need to change this and I need to change that, or I'm such a bad person that I need to change. That seems not only so overwhelming and daunting, but there's almost shame in that, and shaming oneself of needing to change, as opposed to, no, you're still the Maserati. You've always been a Maserati. You're now just going to shift gears from first gear to second gear. You will find that other gear in you that's been there all along. So I just need to say that, because I love that you brought up literally gears, because it's not about changing oneself. It's shifting gears.
And to that point, and I don't want to exhaust this metaphor too much, so gauge us on that in that regard, or gauge me in that regard. But you also can't go from first gear to fourth gear. You can't go from first gear to third gear. You do have to go from first to second, second to third, third to fourth, right, and et cetera. So, and then to your point, as I was reflecting on another story that I'm going to share, is whether or not there's an embedded should when we approach a new transition, and whether or not there is an embedded sense of shame, or, well, because I've done X before, now there's this expectation I should be able to get through this smoother because I dropped my daughter off at kindergarten, and then I took her to her first day of middle school, and then I took her to her first day of high school, and then I took her to her first day of college. I should be better at this. And Dawn was very quick to say, maybe you have experience from which to draw on, but there are a whole new set of circumstances that actually are at play. So give room for those circumstances to challenge whatever experience you have, and let that be unique in and of itself. That if you're pulling a through line through these, each shift, yes, you have, like I said, experience to bring into it, but you also have to make space for all of the different factors that are going to challenge you or make it completely different. So there's some new and there's some different at the same time.
You just brought tears to my eyes. Thank you so much for quelling the itty bitty shitty committee in my head, because I dropped off my daughter sophomore year, same school. I was there a year ago. What's the big deal? And so many other well-meaning parents reassure me, the second time is so much easier. It gets easier every time. You lie, everybody. No, I'm just no, you don't lie. I know that's coming from a good place, but yeah, to your point, it wasn't any easier. It was different.
Yeah.
But to expect it to be easier, maybe parts of it was easier. Sure. The fact that, like, I'm very well aware of the streets that border her campus. So when she tells me where she is, I know I can imagine that in my mind. Or if we, talk about, what restaurant to meet or whatever. Like there's a comfort level there, but that doesn't necessarily mean the whole experience is any easier or there's something wrong with me if it's
Yep.
not easy.
Yep.
Because there are new things about it. It's new that she's that much more confident. It's new that I am very well aware that my son will be leaving, for college in a year. So my heart, my place, my mind is in a different place right now. So thank you for that.
Well, also consider that she didn't have the friendships that she did the first time that you dropped her off last year for her freshman year, or sorry, what not freshman year, what do they call it?
First year.
First year. Sorry. Thank you. She didn't have the relationships. She didn't have the knowledge of the surrounding areas. She wasn't as involved in clubs or activities and whatnot. So perhaps she did, quote unquote, need you a little bit more because you were what was comfortable for her. You were her home at that point as she was building a new home. And now that you come a second year, there's a lot more familiar to her. And that is new for you to see. Even if you visited her before throughout the year, which I know you have, it's that's a big new circumstance of like, you said you felt superfluous, like, oh, am I not needed? Well, you are. It's just, it looks different now. It's a different gear. It's a different shift.
And I can feel differently in that it's wonderful. Like it makes my mama heart proud to see how she owns the place. And that's what we want for our children.
Yep.
But I am also allowed to kind of grieve, if you will, just the recognition of like, yeah, I am a little on the superfluous, unneeded side. And that's okay to grieve and be proud at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that, Grace.
No, I say that only because I've gone through 2.5 years of this, right? Of this kind of self-talk, this kind of self-coaching. And before I into that, I will also say any educator will tell you one of the secrets that we know is that the second day of school is actually the hardest day. The first day, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of joy about it. There's a lot of, or not even joy, but there's just a lot of oomph behind it, plus or minus. It doesn't really matter. The second day is you're like, oh, now we're in it, right? Now we are actually here. We're at the start of a school year. So we started at Iolani, we started to think about, okay, what are we doing for students on the second day? That's where we see the crashes or the meltdowns or the teachers are having a harder time because there's been so much buildup to the first day that for lack of a better word, honeymoon. And I say that and I put a caveat on it because it sounds romantic and I don't mean it that way. But what happens day two? What happens year two? What happened now? The transition continues to carry over, right?
Yes.
And actually that is where now you've moved into that new gear. Okay. So day one, so to speak, is like we're actually shifting gear. It's a little wonky, but there's a lot of energy because you're putting your foot on the clutch and there's a lot more movement. But now you're sitting in second gear. You're like, oh, here we are. We're in this. The second day, the second year, the second step is where I think for myself, the self-coaching was huge. Okay. And I say that because moving to Chicago from Hawaii, there was a lot of like logistics, packing and finding a new place and then getting settled and unpacking. And there's a lot of stuff. And then when that stuff starts to settle, oh, I don't have any friends here. Oh, I don't know any in the theater community. Oh, I don't have a job. And I don't recommend moving and then taking away all these things that are familiar. Like we did all the things, right? We took away our friends, our theater community, our jobs, like we're in a new city. I don't recommend that to anybody. It has been incredibly difficult to experience transition in terms of location, in terms of friendship circles, in terms of career, et cetera. So that's a lot of transition in a lot of different areas. But once, like I said, once the moving dust settled, it was a saving grace for me to allow myself to say, this effing sucks. This is hard. But what immediately I would give myself after is, I'm not going to be here forever. I'm not going to be in this place forever. I will find friends. I will find a career path and I will, et cetera. Like there's a light down the road. I'm not in it now, but it also didn't allow me to try to toxic positivity my way out of the suck, because the suck is real. And the suck, that kind of herky-jerkiness, lasted for a year and a half. 2 years. I mean, I applied to over, I think 127 jobs or something the last that I checked, and I got one callback, one out of all of that. Like that really can wear on somebody's sense of self-worth and professionally. And then to sit at home night after night and like, oh, we've got no one to hang out with, or you know, we're building our friendship circle. We know these two people, and that's it. I was hit a lot with the change. I was hit a lot with the transition, and then the sadness of like Dr. Ignacio and my friends in Hawaii and the theater community in Hawaii. They're there. That network exists in my life. It's just not close to me. That sadness, that like deep sadness of loss and grief that you were talking about was so real because there wasn't the counterbalance. The only thing on the other side of it was hope that it would come, and a belief that there eventually would be there, and that I would come out of this transition. It was a lot of self-coaching, Let's go ahead.
And you acted on that hope and that belief. I mean, I do want to focus on that and ask you about that, because yes, you had the hope and yes, you had the belief, but you went beyond the wish. You acted on it. So tell me, if you don't mind, tell us about making of friends, especially as adults. It's not, as easy.
Sure.
You're right. It's not as easy to make new friends as adults because we don't necessarily have those venues as easily as, well, I mean, I don't mean to say that it's easy for kids either. Like, it's hard to be new at a school and that kind of stuff. But as an adult, tell me how you did it, because you acted on your hope and you acted on your belief. And I think that really, really matters is, yes, recognize the suck, accept the suck, don't toxic positivity away the suck, but also don't dwell in it and abide in it. What did you do so as to not abide in it?
Well, okay. So thank you for that. You're absolutely right. What I will first say is, whether or not this comes to a surprise to our listeners or not, I am a very awkward individual. And when I say awkward, I mean, I have a difficult time in social settings, like connecting with people. So if there's like a new event, or if you're going to your first rehearsal or the first day on the job, or there's kind of these icebreakery type things, your professional development or whatever, I get very weird. Like, I'm like, oh, this is odd to me. If I am in charge of it and I have to put on that front, it's a totally different story. But like, for the most part, I get a little like, is this a safe space for me? What are people going to think of me? I get into kind of that headspace. So I get really kind of awkward. I know that about myself. I also understand that I have tendencies to turtle my way or retract into my shell. And that feels safe. Okay. So knowing those two things about me, in stepping out, in recognizing that one can hope for friends, or one can know that friends will come down the road, but there's a big difference between hoping and actually building friendships, or that I had to overcome and push myself through some things that feel comfortable for me, when in fact they may be comfortable, but they're not doing me any favors, or they're doing a disservice to what it is that I am needing, or what I'm hoping for in my life. So what I mean by that,
that is a huge distinction. That is like I had an epiphany at that moment in that where that comes from is our tendency, certainly my tendency. So if I say our, it might not be the royal we, but certainly with you and me, Zachary, I hear you. I feel you. I know I mistakenly equate comfort and safe, meaning you can still feel uncomfortable and also still be safe. So we don't always have to look for a place of comfort in order to feel safe. We can, and the only reason why I'm like, this is such an epiphany is just because, like, even your discussion of icebreaker, even the mention of icebreaker, I like felt a little vomit in my mouth, because I'm not a networker. I don't like networking. I don't like those icebreakers. I like authentic one-on-one conversations. I don't like speed dating. Like, I could never imagine that. Thank God I never did do that. So just your mere mention of ice breaking, I'm just kind of like, literally
Yep.
had like
Yep.
vomit in my mouth when I go to orthopedic surgery conferences, when it's time for that 15-minute network break. If the conference is in the hotel, that's when I go straight up to my room
Yep.
for
Yep.
the 15 minutes. I don't have, whether I have to go pee or anything.
Yep.
That's my like recluse. That's my turtling.
Mm-hmm.
But now I recognize, thanks to your naming it in
Mm-hmm.
terms of comfort and space, the two are not tied together, nor are they mutually exclusive. I can still be safe and feel a little bit of discomfort and just accept that, okay, this is going to be a little uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean I'm unsafe. So
Mm-hmm.
go with the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you
totally.
for liberation.
Well, and I don't remember exactly where it came from, but I do remember hearing somebody telling me something that sometimes the things that are the most comfortable actually can do the most harm for us, right? And
Sure.
so, yeah, and I also allowed myself to say, no, I'm not going to step out. I'm not going, I need to stay home, or I need to have that time for myself. So I also want to say that there were plenty of times where I'm like, no, I don't want to go out tonight. I don't want to try to make friends. I don't want to initiate. And that was okay. I gave myself that permission. In fact, I'm doing it right now. I'm starting a new show. And upon the first rehearsal, it's a very weird time, and I kind of love it and hate it at the same time, where everyone's kind of sizing each other up, like where does each person's talent lie, who's a quote unquote strong singer and who's not, and who picks up music well. And there's a lot of like weird like political jockeying type of space, and I really don't like it, really don't like it. And then there's also this, like, to your point, this like faux, like, hey, I'm so and so, and I'm so and so. It's so nice to meet you. Like, and I just get nauseous because I'm like, that's not real to me, right? So I give myself, I'm in the room, but I know down the road we are going to continue to interact and make, build relationships and everything. So do I feel like I have to go around and introduce myself to everybody right now? No. Do I also feel like I need to put my phone away and be present with everyone? No. Like, I'm giving myself the space to say, I'm okay with this level of discomfort at a certain point. Okay. You know what I mean? And that's
Well
my own
done.
barometer. Each one of us have that. So the rock climbing community, for example, incredibly friendly, warm, welcoming. For me, for the first 6 months, I knew parallel play, to use a educator lingo, was enough. Meaning, we're climbing together. Maybe we'll talk like about something, but it's not like, hey, do you want to go like grab a drink together and we're going to be best friends and hold hands and like cuddle and do all these things? No. Right. So it's also an acceptance of time and my own feelings and my own barometers of where I'm at, putting myself in a place of discomfort, but that is just enough that I still feel brave, right? And I still feel safe, but it's still uncomfortable. That frequent check-in was enough to push me past, hibernating in my own house, but also continue to give myself space in those places of discomfort to put parameters around what I'm willing to accept in terms of discomfort and what is too much for me. And does that make sense?
Oh my God, it makes so much sense.
Okay.
Keep going. Keep going.
But we've all had enough transitions to understand that sometimes the first and second and third times don't become the best friends or the job that you take or the career path or the relationship, whatever it is. So as I started to connect with people or apply for jobs or like build a life here, I also understood and gave a lot of room to the fact that maybe this friendship that's forming is not actually the friendship that's going to serve. And like we came into each other's life in a point of a transition mutually, and that we both served a very important time, a very important role, and that was okay. So I, as somebody who likes to form like authentic, true relationships, had to also allow myself room to say, this friendship may not last forever, and that is okay.
We talked about that in a prior
yes,
episode. Friends for a reason, friends for a season,
yes,
friends for life. There's different levels, and that's okay.
but that for us, the type of people that we are, the shedding of some of those relationships or those times or whatever, those jobs, like maybe you're in a job for 6 months and that's all that job was supposed to do. For those of us that want to hold on and believe that it's forever, it can do a mind game to me, right? To be like, maybe
Yes.
this means that I'm not actually like invested in our friendship. And what kind of friend does that make me? And I had to really shut a lot of that down and accept that in a time of transition, things show up to support you. It's like the rocket launching to the moon. You do have to shed some of your jets. And that is hard for me. That is really hard because I'm like, no, we are going to be, friends forever. This is going to be, the job. This is going to be the thing. That's not always the case. So that is another thing that has helped me, is to also just give a little space to the value that things serve in a transition, including people, and that you also do that for others. Like I show up in people's life to help them through some transition, and then our relationship may change or evolve. Maybe there's some grieving on my part, but that's okay too. So that has been another huge self-talk that I have gone through in the transition as well.
And that also helps to not shame or blame oneself, nor vilify the other, right? What one can still be grateful for the friendship for the reason or friendship for the season. And if it doesn't continue to friends for life, it doesn't take away from the fact that for that moment, for that reason, or for that season, it was a beautiful serving friendship.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's
great. And then the last thing that I will say, and this was given to me by my uncle a long time ago. He's a surfer. He's my godfather, actually. And I got to talk to him shortly after we moved to Chicago. I ended up seeing him again, and we were talking a little bit about the transition, and he reminded me. So when I graduated from 8th grade, he took me to an amusement park in Southern California. He loves amusement parks. I love amusement parks. And, and we were talking, he's like, how are you feeling about high school? And I was saying I was a little bit nervous and everything. And he goes, at the time, he said, surfers will tell you that you don't always have to choose every wave, right? And sometimes just sitting on the board is still forward progress. And so I'm like, it makes no sense to me. I'm 14 years old, and I'm like going to high school, and here's my uncle like trying to wax pontificate at an amusement park. And I'm just like, what? Anyway, why that was particularly poignant was that I always felt like, okay, today I'm going to get up and I'm going to apply for jobs, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to see the city. And I felt this internal pressure to push myself through the transition and to push. And it was a really good reminder that a pause can also be forward progress. And I've never thought about it that way. You've talked about it on the podcast, in various ways, Elizabeth, but it really became true in that it's a transition, and yes, it's going to take time, but pushing myself through it, and the expectation and that inner itty bitty shitty community that's saying you've got to do, should expectations, belied the value of just sitting in it. And that sitting in it is actually still doing something. The absence of action doesn't mean that there's inaction, that there can still be something happening. So especially that really helped.
Yeah, especially when, to use a similar metaphor in terms of when you sit, whether it's on that board, if you're going with the flow, right? So like imagining a river or imagining, the ocean, you can paddle, upstream to the cows come home, and all you're doing is just creating more work for yourself without any actual activity. Or like in a rocking chair, they say, you can put in all this energy in a rocking chair, but you go nowhere. But back to the water, yeah, you can paddle upstream with all the force, determination, and ambition and motivation. But if you are going upstream and creating your own resistance, there isn't going anywhere. Whereas if you kind of let go of the oar sometimes and just go with the flow, there is movement, and in some ways with ease, because it's downstream, because you're letting the water go with you. I can't help but again think of water and how Bruce Lee would always say, like, be like water. It's amazing how water is powerful. It can actually, create and shape a rock by going along with the flow. And then another thing about water is when you talk about or think about like relationships that we hold on to, or ideas that we're so fixated on in terms of direction of life or job or identity or whatever, and that you're gripping onto it so, with such tenacity. Actually, you hold more water if you just relax that grip a little bit. Yeah. Whereas if you're holding and clenching with a fist, the water goes through your fingers and you can't hold as much as an ever so slight relax and release of that tenacity.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such a great way to think about it. And even the idea of like just cupping your hands, like where can you hold more water to? Yeah, no, that's so. Oh, that's really juicy. I like that a lot. I also just wanted to say, so to a question that you had asked earlier, I really thought about where my interests were. I thought about what support I did have, who I am and what I'm interested in, and really started from there. So if it's a transition that involves moving to a new place and you've got to make friends, like, yeah, it's tough to make friends. And I think as we get older, our lives start to feel a little more routinized, like maybe we've been living in a place a little bit longer and we've built a network already. So to break in as a new person can be difficult, but I'm blessed. I've got the theater community, and the theater community is always a wonderful place to start. But I know that many of you have resources at your fingertips that you could tap into if you wanted. There are other moms that have gone through similar types of experiences. It's just tapping into where that network can be for you, right? There are, a friend of mine, she is married to a man in the military, and they move a lot for his job. And I asked her one time, I said, does it get easier? Like if you're used to this more? And she goes, no, it doesn't really get easier because every move is different. I just know where I can tap into like support network. She's a person of deep connection with online communities, and that doesn't help her get out socially, right? To your point about going to put your feet in the grass, et cetera, like being outside. But it still helps her in that transition. So it really actually gave me a moment to look inward and say, what do I already have in place that can help me with this? For those of you who are people of faith, your faith community is certainly an avenue that you have to find support, to find a network, to find people who will support you in your transition. And I have found, as a person of faith, no greater welcome and true grace and true welcoming when you are. And my faith communities have always without fail stepped up to say, okay, what can we do? How can we help? Where can we support you? So, in addition to whatever interests you may have or whatever resources you have to support you, support groups, et cetera, if you are a person of faith, there is just a plethora of resources available for you, people, and particularly as a Catholic and as a Christian, the grounding in spiritual text also then provides stories of, Jesus as just as a human had so many moments of transition, and the people that he interacted with were constantly, he was sharing parables that would help people through transitions. So just consider the strength that you have that you can tap into if you are a person of faith, or some kind of similar ethical grounding community to support you as well. So I wanted to make sure that I added that in there.
Amen. Yeah. I don't know why I just, for a split second, I just like kind of, my heart was full and I almost felt like tears in my eyes when you're talking about this time of transition, and how a big part of being able to navigate the transition is just your recognition of looking into yourself and who you are and what matters to you and what do you have, not so much what you lack, but what you have. And I couldn't help but think of, this need or opportunity. I won't even say need, opportunity to reevaluate and look at one's self and one's identity. And that's why from the beginning of the episode, I talked about it's not a midlife crisis as if it's a bad thing. It's a midlife reflection. That's all that it is. We don't have to make it negative with negative connotations. It's an opportunity of a midlife reflection of one's identity. And then upon this is how my mind works. Sometimes it's just like ping, 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 ping. Then upon thinking of identity, I couldn't help but then think of, in using the word transition, trans community, our trans youth, and all of the pressure and the stigma on people who are going through their own journey of reflection of their identity. And then now my mind pings to a different place of, trans does not have to be a bad, negative, shameful word. What are some of the most beautiful words that begin with trans is, yes, transition. And it can be beautiful because if we look at it as an opportunity, there's beauty and hope, to your point, hope in that word of transition. Transformation. What could be more beautiful? We talk about metamorphosis of caterpillars to butterflies. Well, that's the same thing for people. Yeah. There can be a transformation. There can be an up-leveling, not a changing per se, but again, shifting that gear to an up-leveling in one's transformation. And then ultimately, one of the most beautiful words is transcendence. One can transcend whatever is burdening them, what is uncomfortable, what is difficult. There is the opportunity to transcend past, transcend beyond, in this moment, in this season of transition in one's life, and transformation and transcendence into one's identity.
Boom. So listeners, for any of you who are in the middle of what you feel is a really palpable transition, maybe today's episode gave you some things to think about. But if anything that you can take away in this movement across, right? If we think about trans being Latin and its root across two different places, that in that transition, that you never forget that you are not just simply enough.
You are more than enough.
Just as you are. Period. Mwah. Mwah.